Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to today's GIC talk. I'm Bradley Reese, and I'm a GIC talk volunteer. Before we start, please make sure that your cell phones have been turned off or switched to silent mode. As you know, there was no GIC talk last week due to the Chuseok holiday, so I'm glad to see all of you back here at the GIC on this beautiful fall day. Today's speaker, Kim-Soo Rasmussen, is currently an assistant professor assistant professor in the Department of Self-Designed Interdisciplinary Studies at Cheonan National University, specializing in 20th century literature, comparative literature, and intellectual history. Dr. Rasmussen received his PhD from the University of Aarhus in Denmark. His previous works include an assistant research professorship at the University of Copenhagen and publications in various journals. In his advanced summary for today's talk, Dr. Rasmussen cites the scholar Frederick Jameson as identifying one of the key characteristics of the theory of postmodernism as being a weakened sense of history. He goes so far as to frame the postmodern perspective as the end of history. However, that disconnectedness does not extend only in retrospect, but it also affects visions of the future. The genre of cinema, as well as literature, that is perhaps most concerned with visions of the future is science fiction. And one highly influential work of science fiction is mentioned in the title of this talk, the classic 1982 film Blade Runner. This film, based on a story by American science fiction writer Philip K. Dick, is renowned in cinema circles for its bleak, dystopian view of the future, as well as mixing futuristic sci-fi elements with retro film noir motifs from the early 20th century cinema. Blade Runner is one of my favorite movies, so I personally can't wait to hear how Dr. Rasmussen will discuss his thoughts on postmodernism using this and other films. Now, let's all welcome our speaker with a big hand.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's a great pleasure and an honor to be here today. The topic, as mentioned earlier, the topic of today's talk is postmodernism, or more specifically, postmodern cinema, and even more specifically, the classic Blade Runner. I would like to try and a few notes about me. I had some surprised questions about my background. I was born in Korea, in Seoul, but then I was adopted to Denmark, and I grew up in Denmark. And all right. So, Blade Runner. Does it work? Okay. I had originally planned like a small video clip, but due to technical issues, I have to skip that. Okay, so postmodern culture, according to the American cultural critic Frederick Jameson, postmodern culture is defined by four basic characteristics. One, technology, new development in technology, in particular technological development related to genetics, related to the power source, nuclear power, and all kinds of informational technology. I think most of us are more or less familiar with these technological developments. Second, postmodernism is associated with a certain kind of emotional, a certain dominant emotions in the cultural expressions, in postmodern literature, postmodern cinema, in postmodern art, etc. So there are certain emotions that are recurrent themes, and those emotions are a certain sense of paranoia, that there is somebody somewhere, we don't know where, exactly who, we don't know exactly what they are doing, but we have this sense that somebody is looking at us. Somebody is always checking up on what we are doing. This sense of paranoia. That is a strong emotion in postmodern culture. Another powerful emotion in postmodern culture is this sense of melancholy. This sense of today in our postmodern culture, we have lost something. And there is a certain sense of nostalgic melancholy for this thing that we have lost. Alright, and third, this experience, a certain experience of space. According to Frederick Jameson, this is a very famous analysis. The experience in postmodern culture, it is like wandering around, like walking around in a big hotel. In a huge postmodern hotel. We're trying to find our way to a conference room or to our room or to the front desk or wherever, but we get lost. And this sense of disorientation, according to Frederick Jameson, is a powerful experience in postmodern culture. So we can say, to illustrate this, what we're talking about, postmodern culture, it is like we walk around in a big hotel and we get lost. So, this sense of disorientation, we can describe that as a certain disconnect. Disconnect between our abstract mental mapping. We always, when we walk around, when we move around, we always have this mental idea of a map. Yeah? We always have this, up is north, right is east, etc., etc., etc. We have these mental coordinates in our head that we use to navigate. But according to Frederick Jameson, the sense of disorientation, it means that there is a disconnect between our you can say, phenomenological experience of moving in space, and then this mental map. There's a disconnect. So we cannot, no longer is the GPS system, the mental GPS system, is out of order. So when we move through space, our GPS system tells us that we're actually going in a completely different direction. So we get lost, we are disoriented. That's, according to Frederick Jameson, a powerful experience in postmodern culture. Okay, and the fourth characteristic is an experience of time. More specifically, what Frederick Jameson describes as the end of history. And this is the theme that I want to emphasize more in the discussion of Blade Runner. Okay, but to sort of summarize it, postmodernism is the cultural expression of contemporary capitalist society. So you can say that our contemporary capitalist society, and then you have on top of that, we have the cultural logic, the cultural expression, that is the movies, the books, the music, the art, the scientific and philosophical ideas, all of that, according to Frederick Jameson, is postmodernism. Okay, if we look more specifically at cinema, and postmodern cinema, I have made some brief examples. There are some of the defining characteristics of postmodern cinema. They are: one, pastiche; second, a flattening of affect or a flattening of emotion; third, hyper-reality; fourth, a time bending or a bending of time, again, an experience of time; and finally, what theorists call post-humanism. Okay, let me go into more detail. The first one, pastiche. It means that in literature and in film, also in art, postmodern culture becomes extremely ironic, extremely self-reflected, and instead of painting a picture about, say, the sunflower, like Van Gogh, today a postmodern artist would paint a picture of a picture of Van Gogh. So there's this hyper-reflectiveness, and there's this sense of irony. Frederick James, he also describes this as, he describes this as sort of, we have lost a sense of nature. Postmodernism is what we have when nature is gone for good. Now, this is a bit hyperbolic. He's exaggerating to make a point. But when we look at art, when we look at films, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, second one, flattening of affect. This is nothing new. This is the same as we had in modernist culture, a sense of alienation. That means technology, drugs, violence, and other phenomena, they lead to a sense of we cannot no longer, in these movies, we see characters that are no longer able to feel anything real, authentic. What we have is, for example, in Taxi Driver, we have this person who is really a cripple, an emotional cripple, who is unable to have authentic emotional bonds with other people, including himself. Also in Apocalypse Now, the soldiers they're really not authentic human beings. They are individuals that have been crippled emotionally. And other examples. So this sense of flattening of affect. But as I said earlier, this is nothing new. This is an old topic in modern culture. All right, hyper-reality. This is something quite new, quite distinct. This idea that an artificial reality is better or even more desirable than the real, the natural world in which we live. So this stands that in the Matrix, the artificial world, the computer-generated world, it is better. We prefer the artificial. It is more desirable. This is a new idea in postmodern culture, that various films and artworks and And various artists, they explore this idea, what these new technological possibilities, they enable the artists to explore these ideas. Okay, and fourth, this idea of time traveling back and forth in time, and also exploring the counterfactual. That means, what if somebody had done something different, then history would have been different. Here we can mention some movies, 12 Monkeys, in which the protagonist is traveling back in time and trying to collect data. And also Memento, it's about distorted memory. And finally, posthumanism. This idea that in postmodern cinema, this idea that human beings are enhanced, technologically enhanced. So, and even improved through technology. So we have these these examples, District 9, for example, and in Avatar. All right. So my point here is that all of these 5 characteristics they can be found in Blade Runner. We can return to each one of the 5 characteristics later on. But just quick, the posthumanism, this theme, of course, is one of the major themes in the whole idea of the replicant, the humanoid machine. Here, time bending, this is mostly related to the memory, the manipulation of memory, the implant of artificial memories, and this is, of course, a very fundamental manipulation of our sense of time. Hyper-reality, again, this idea that the machines are better, or perhaps even more desirable than the human beings. Flattening of affect. The main character, Deckard, he's really a cripple, emotional cripple. And the pastiche, this is something that I would like to return to, but just to indicate it here, we have several indications of the movie referring to Christianity. There is, first of all, the scene where Deckard, he kills Eldon Tyrell, and Eldon Tyrell greets, sorry, not Deckard, but Roy kills Eldon Tyrell, and Eldon Tyrell welcomes Roy as the prodigal son. Of course, that is a reference to the story in the Bible. But here in Blade Runner, it's not serious. It's not a rewriting of this biblical story. It is a pastiche. And so it's a sort of self-reflected, ironic gesture. And the same goes for the stigmata. At one point, Roy, he's stigmatized, and it has some clear references to Christ. But I would argue that these references to popular culture, in this case the Bible, is really a pastiche. So it's ironic, self-referential, and this movie is not Christian. All right. All right. So now that I have tried to confuse you, what is this postmodernism? What is this? What is he talking about, this crazy guy? Okay, but a simple way to understand postmodernism is as a period. It's a period in cultural history. Similar in many ways to, for example, Romanticism. Romanticism was a period in Western cultural history in the early 19th century. One of the most powerful ideas, of course, was the French Revolution, the ideas of the French Revolution. But somehow, this French Revolution, with the lofty ideals of equality and the killing of the king, and all people can rise and become free, but this revolution failed. And so this experience of, on the one hand, revolution, and on the other hand, failure of this revolution. That is a basic, fundamental experience in Romanticism. Another example could be modern culture, modernism. As most of you this probably know, this is a very powerful movement in Western culture in the early 20th century. Some years before, some years after the First World War. And one of the most powerful, you can say, experiences that are given expression in modernism is in the 19th century, there was this idea that technology and science propels development. History is a one-way journey to a better world. It's a train destined for a better future. But the First World War is a collapse of that idea. This idea that history is a continuous development towards a better future. This idea, which defines, in Europe at least, which defines the mindset and the whole mentality of the 19th century. With the First World War, this mindset collapses. No longer can we believe that in producing better weapons, we produce a better world. No. And this, of course, this idea or this collapse of this optimism that defined the 19th century, this collapse, this, you can say, pessimism, was started really with the First World War and then really emphasized with the Holocaust during the Second World War. After the Holocaust, it's no longer possible to believe that technology is a one-way ticket to a better world. And postmodernism comes after this. Okay. So what is, you can say, the basic experience of the postmodern era? According to Jameson, one of the defining characteristics, one of the defining experiences of postmodern culture is again this hope or this revolution, this hope for a better future, a utopia, but a revolution or a revolutionary desire that failed. You can say it is, so it's really postmodernism, according to Frederick Jameson, is motivated by this deep sense of pessimism, a deep sense of disorientation, historically and also geographically, a sense of disorientation. So when Frederick Jameson, he describes the experience of postmodernism as this sense of getting lost in a big hotel. Think of the big hotel, that's the world. The big hotel is really our world. And we get lost in this world. That's postmodernism, the essence of postmodernism, according to Frederick Jameson. So, this getting lost, what does it mean more specifically? On the one hand, this disconnect between the mapping system and our phenomenological experience of space, but also this getting lost in history, in time. And what that means more specifically is that without a sense of a better world, if we abandon this idea of a better world, how can we criticize our contemporary world? how can we criticize something in the present without a certain idea of how things should be? Without this idea of how things should be, how things could be better, then we cannot criticize our contemporary world. So, for Jameson, this sense of disorientation, it really means that we are unable to judge our contemporary world. We are unable to judge contemporary phenomena. Should we go to war? Should we not go to war? We don't know, because we have lost this GPS system. There's a disconnect between the GPS system and our phenomenological experience. So postmodernism, it really means that we are no longer sure. It is a sense of deep, deep, deep uncertainty. At the deepest level, we don't know. Before, in earlier times, there are various ways to guarantee our certainty. You can say it is religion or some other metaphysical system that guarantees what we believe in, something which is true, something that we cannot question. But in the postmodern world, that the anchor, so to speak, the anchor in the solid world, the solid truth. This is absolutely an unquestionable truth. This knowledge, this conviction is lost. So, at the deepest level, there is uncertainty. And so you can say this experience of uncertainty is given a whole range of expressions in art, in music, in literature, and of course also in film. And I would say that Blade Runner gives a very powerful expression to, you can say, a certain variant, a certain form of this uncertainty. Okay, let me talk more specifically about this uncertainty. Okay, so a central element in postmodernism is a peculiar sense of time or history. So we can describe this through a contrast with modernism. In modernism, there was this sense of utopia. There was this sense of a better world. We can imagine a better world. And an artistic expression was often linked to the hope of a better society in the future. So this whole idea, for example, of the artist, this is a very powerful idea in the early 20th century, of the artist as an avant-garde. The avant-garde, the artistic avant-garde, where art is, so to speak, ahead of the rest. And they are sort of exploring the future. And then by interpreting the future, we can sort of catch up with the future. So this idea of the artist as somehow being ahead of society, this is closely linked to the idea of utopia. Without utopia, this whole idea of the artist as somehow ahead of time breaks down. It makes no sense any longer. Okay, but in postmodern culture, we have no such idea. We do not think of the artist as being ahead of the rest of society. And this is partly due to this sense of the end of history. Now, what does that mean? Okay. In 1989, that was with the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's a very important date or important information. With the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Cold War, Fukuyama, a famous Japanese-American political scientist, he wrote an article. It's a very short article that became famous all over the world. And in this article, which is called The End of History, in this article, he says that the end of the Cold War, or the fall of the Berlin Wall, it means not only the end of the Cold War, and not only the failure of the communist regimes in Eastern Europe and in Russia, but it means the fall of the Berlin Wall, it means the end of history as such. Wow, how powerful expression. But what does it mean? Okay, so first let's read this sentence. What we may be witnessing is not just the end of the Cold War, or the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. That is, the end point of mankind's ideological evolution. Ideological evolution. And the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. Okay, what does that mean? So he says, this event in Berlin, it means the end of history. But what he means is that he uses the term history in a very particular sense. History often, or in a normal sense, it refers to events such as wars, elections, revolutions, etc. Events. But Fukuyama does not use the term history in this sense. He uses it in a different sense. When he says history, that means a struggle. A struggle between ideas. Not between people, not between countries, but between ideas. So a struggle between ideas. So the history, in Fukuyama's sense, is a battle of ideas. And these ideas are political ideas. How should we organize in the best fashion? How should we organize a society? Those ideas are in conflict. And you can say the 20th century is defined more or less as the battle between three competing ideologies. One, liberal democracy, Western liberal democracy. Second, fascism, and various versions of fascism. Extreme, you can say extreme ethnic nationalism to imperialism in various disguises. And third is communism, various kinds of socialism. So you can say, in this sense, history, according to Fukuyama, in the 20th century is this battle of ideas between liberal democracy, fascism, and communism. And this event in Berlin is really the end of history. There is no more battle, because liberal democracy has won. Fascism lost in the Second World War. Communism lost during the Cold War, and it lost definitively with the fall of the Berlin Wall. So now there's only one man standing, and that is liberal democracy. all the competing ideas, the competing political ideologies have lost. Nobody would seriously argue that we should introduce fascism or that we should introduce communism. No, those ideologies are dead. So, what do we have left? We have one political ideology left: liberal democracy. And this is what Fukuyama means by the end of history. The end of history means there is only one political ideology left on the field. All the other ones, they have lost. They have been eliminated for various reasons. And this experience that there is no alternative, we can no longer think an alternative to liberal democracy. It's dangerous to imagine an alternative. Even for artists, the most imaginative people, the most creative people, and the most crazy people, also the most irresponsible, right? We say artists, they can do whatever they want as long as they don't have power, right? So they can create movies and create music, do whatever they want, because it's somehow we agree that it is good for the rest of the society that artists are creative, but no power, right? But even for the artists, they cannot imagine a future in which liberal democracy is no longer. That is the end of history. The end of history is the victory of liberal democracy. And the difficulty or even the impossibility of imagining a future which is different. Now, I think that in science fiction movies such as Blade Runner, we see this experience. And we also see that we are somehow not completely satisfied with liberal democracy. Even though we cannot imagine an alternative, we are not happy with liberal democracy. And I think that there is a sense of, a wish or a desire to imagine a different kind of future. A future which is not dominated by liberal democracy. A different, perhaps even an impossible future. But I think this is the theme that is explored in Blade Runner. So you can say, on the one hand, this sense that, yes, it is impossible to imagine a different future, but on the other hand, a wish or a desire for a different future. Okay, so let's try to bring it down a little bit to talk about more specific details about the film. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the film, but I hope that you are somewhat familiar with it. Okay, I'll just skip this altogether and just talk more freely. Okay, so let's take a step back and talk again about Fukuyama. So Fukuyama, he is relying on the German philosopher Hegel and a French interpretation which has been very influential by Cauchy. Well, we don't need to delve too much into the details of this, but the basic dynamic, you can say the basic logic of his analysis of the end of history is this very famous logic or dialectic in Hegel between the master and the slave. Now, the master and the slave, you can say it's like good and bad, or it's like a myth. So it's not a particular, a specific master and a specific slave. It's sort of an allegory of general processes or developments. Okay? So, according to Hegel, history is, or the engine of history, the logic of history, is this struggle between master and slave. Okay, what does that mean? This crazy German philosopher. What does he mean? Okay, what he means is that there are two parts, and they're struggling, competing for recognition. Recognition as in value. So they're not competing over money or anything material. They're competing for pure prestige. They're snobs, you can say. It's social value, social prestige, nothing else. But they're competing. These two parts are competing over social prestige. Now, at the beginning, you can say that the social, sort of very innocent. Oh, but I did this, which is very prestigious, so you should recognize me as being noble, or being brave, or being good. Yeah, but I did this, and so you should recognize me for etc., etc., etc. So there's this struggle. And the struggle escalates until the point where one of them is threatening to kill the other for pure prestige. Nothing material, not for food, not for anything that is necessary for survival. It is a struggle for prestige. Purely prestige. Okay, so the conflict escalates until the point where they are ready to kill each other. And then one steps down. One of the parts, okay, I give up, you win, I give up. And he becomes the slave. The winner, becomes the master. Okay, so there's this struggle between the master and the slave. The master now can enjoy. You can say consumer. It's consumption. Enjoyment, entertainment does not have to work. Whereas the slave has to work for the master. Now there's this complicated story, but in the beginning you can say the master wins, right? The master wins and is able to suppress the slave. Okay, that's the first chapter. But in the long run, the slave actually turns out to be the real victor. Because, well, it's also a long, complicated story, but it flips upside down, okay? Because the master becomes so decadent and is just enjoying, and so the master loses all sense of reality, really. It's like a Roman emperor who has lost all sense of reality. The slave, on the other hand, has to sweat and transform nature into something useful. Cut the trees and hack the stones, etc. So the slave is really the one that is building society, and at the same time has a realistic sense of the nature of reality through work. Okay, but the conclusion is that the slave is the real hero of the story in the long run. Okay, so there's this ongoing struggle between master and slave. And this is the logic of history, according to Hegel. And this is the idea that Fukuyama takes over. So, with the end of history means, in one sense, it means that this struggle between master and slave has ended. Now, in postmodern society, in the West at least, everybody are consumers. Huge, big bellies, and we don't have to work too hard because we just consume, right? So the end of history means that it's really this struggle between masters and slaves is over, it's finished, according to one version. Okay, let's connect this to Blade Runner. I want to read the basic, the central conflict in Blade Runner. I think everybody would agree, more or less, is the conflict between human beings and replicants. Yeah? Human beings are the masters who have created these machines to work in the mines and to work in the off-colonies, in the off-world colonies, right? And the replicants, the androids, the machines, they are the slaves of this Blade Runner universe. So here we have this master and slave dialectic. Okay. Do you agree? Those of you who have seen the movie, I hope that you can recognize at least some of it. Well, there are certain parts in the movie where the replicants are described very literally as slaves. Okay. But what I would like to suggest is that Roy, the struggle between Roy, the leader of the replicants, and Deckard, the guy who is supposed to hunt and shoot, kill, or retire the replicants. This battle between Roy and Deckard is the battle, or the struggle between the master and the slave. So here in this movie, in this postmodern movie, we have a description of, you can say, this basic struggle between master and slave. Okay, so if we buy into Fukuyama, this idea that history is over, the struggle between masters and slaves finished, the struggle between ideologies finished, all we have left is one victorious idea of liberal democracy, one victorious ideas of the masters. Now, in Blade Runner, a postmodern movie, I think what we see is a little bit different. We see, yes, the world. The world that we see in this movie is, there is no nature. All the animals are dead. The machines have taken over. It's rainy, it's dark, it's depressing. It's this film noir in the future. It's this completely dehuman world in the future. It's a dystopia. It's a world in which human beings cannot live. That's why they leave. Oh yes, we want to leave the world. Only the ones that have no choice stay on this desperate, this desert. The earth is really destroyed. It's over. It's finished. So you can say that in this world of Blade Runner, you have the end of history. You have the dystopia. You have the world is destroyed. But at the same time, when the machines, when the replicants, they return to Earth in order to what? They want to find some answers, some kind of perhaps recognition. When they return to Earth, they reignite, they restart, it's a new beginning of history. So you can say I would suggest in this struggle between Roy and Deckard, there is, on the one hand, you have this recognition, yes, the world is destroyed, it is the end of history in a certain sense. But on the other hand, you have this idea that with the replicants returning to this desolate and destroyed and dark earth, there is a sense of history beginning again after the end of history. Okay, so all right, I have some more things, but I think I have already spoken for 50 minutes. That is way too long. And yes, I will end it here. I hope it was not too confusing. Thank you very much.